The bank lobby carried a quiet kind of pressure that morning, the sort that didn't come from noise but from expectation. Polished marble floors reflected the overhead lights like still water, and every footstep echoed just a little too clearly. Conversations stayed low, clipped, professional. People here spoke the language of numbers, and numbers didn't need emotion. The glass doors opened with a soft mechanical sigh, and she stepped inside. For a brief moment, the outside world clung to her, the dust, the warmth, the ordinary rhythm of life beyond wealth. Then the doors shut behind her, and she stood in the middle of something that felt entirely different. Her shoes were scuffed, their edges softened by years of wear. The hem of her coat brushed against her calves, slightly frayed, slightly faded. It wasn't that she looked out of place, it was that she looked like she belonged somewhere else entirely. A man in a tailored suit glanced up from his phone, his eyes flicking over her before quickly returning to the screen, as though he'd seen enough. A woman seated nearby adjusted her handbag a little closer to herself, not out of fear, but instinct. Judgment in places like this was rarely loud. It was subtle, almost polite. But she didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps she simply didn't care. Her gaze moved across the room with quiet focus, taking in the counters, the offices, the soft glow of digital screens behind the desks. There was no hesitation in her steps as she made her way toward the reception desk. "I just want to see my balance," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a kind of steadiness that made the receptionist pause. It wasn't the request itself, people asked that question dozens of times a day. It was the way she said it. Calm, direct, without the usual undertone of urgency or anxiety. The receptionist blinked, adjusting her posture. "Of course, ma'am. Do you have an account with us?" "Yes." A simple answer. The receptionist offered a practiced smile, though something in her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "Please, take a seat. One of our associates will assist you shortly." "Thank you." The woman turned and walked toward the seating area, her steps unhurried. She chose a chair near the edge of the room, away from the central flow of clients and staff, and sat down quietly. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers loosely intertwined around the strap of her small purse. Time moved differently around her. While others checked their watches, scrolled through phones, or tapped their feet impatiently, she simply sat. Observing. Waiting. As though she had done this many times before. Across the lobby, a burst of laughter broke the stillness. It was sharp, confident, unapologetic. The source was impossible to ignore. A man stood near one of the glass offices, surrounded by attention like it was something he carried with him. His suit was immaculate, navy, perfectly tailored. A gold watch glinted on his wrist, catching the light every time he moved his hand. Two assistants hovered nearby, one holding a tablet, the other flipping through a folder of documents. The bank manager stood with them, nodding a little too eagerly, his smile stretched thin with effort. Yes, of course, we can arrange that," the manager was saying, his voice careful, almost deferential. The man chuckled. "I would hope so." His gaze drifted across the room, not searching for anything in particular, just surveying, as if everything in his line of sight belonged, in some small way, to him. And then he saw her. It was a brief glance at first. Then a second, longer one. His lips curved into a faint smirk. "Interesting clientele today," he remarked, his voice just loud enough to carry. The manager followed his gaze, spotted the woman, and let out a soft, uncertain laugh. "Ah, yes, well, we aim to serve everyone." "Of course you do," the man replied, amusement threading through his tone. But his attention didn't fully return to his conversation. Not entirely. There was something about her stillness, her lack of self-consciousness, that lingered in his thoughts longer than he expected. Meanwhile, the minutes stretched. The receptionist tapped lightly on her keyboard, occasionally glancing toward the waiting area. The woman remained where she was, her posture unchanged, her expression unreadable. Finally, a young employee approached her. "Ma'am," he said gently. She looked up. "Yes. If you'd come with me, I can help you." She nodded and stood, following him without question. He led her to a smaller desk positioned slightly away from the main counters, a quieter corner, where interactions were brief and often routine. "Do you have your account number?" he asked, settling into his chair. She reached into her purse, carefully opening it as though its contents mattered more than they appeared. From inside, she pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. The edges were worn, the creases deep from being opened and closed many times. "It's written here," she said, handing it to him. "Thank you." He took the paper, smoothing it out before typing the number into his computer. His movements were casual at first, almost automatic. Another account. Another quick check. His fingers paused. The screen loaded. He blinked. Once. Then again. A slight crease formed between his brows as he leaned closer, as though proximity might change what he was seeing. Is something wrong? She asked quietly. No, just one moment. His tone had shifted. The ease was gone, replaced by something tighter, more focused. He straightened in his chair, eyes scanning the screen again, more carefully this time. He clicked through tabs, checked details, refreshed the page. The numbers didn't change. A subtle tension crept into his shoulders. Across the room, the millionaire noticed. He tilted his head slightly, curiosity piqued. Problem, he called out, a hint of amusement returning to his voice. The young employee didn't respond. Instead, he stood abruptly, almost knocking his chair back in the process. Ma'am, he said, his voice now edged with formality, would you mind coming with me to one of our private offices? She studied him for a moment, then nodded. If that's necessary. Yes, it is. The shift didn't go unnoticed. The manager turned, his attention immediately drawn. What's going on? The employee leaned in, whispering something too low for others to hear. Whatever he said drained the color from the manager's face. Are you sure? The manager whispered back. Yes, sir. The manager inhaled slowly, then exhaled, composing himself as best he could. When he turned to the woman, his entire demeanor had changed. Ma'am, he said, his voice now respectful, careful, even, please, come with me. The room seemed to hold its breath. People who had ignored her before now watched openly, their curiosity no longer hidden. Conversations paused. Phones lowered. Even the millionaire's smirk faded, replaced by something sharper. Interest. As the woman walked toward the glass office, escorted now not by a junior employee but the manager himself, the atmosphere shifted in a way that was impossible to ignore. Something had changed. Something important. The door to the office closed softly behind them. The millionaire frowned, his gaze fixed on the glass walls, trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening inside. What was that about? He asked. The manager's assistant hesitated, unsure whether to answer. A moment later, the manager stepped back out briefly, his expression controlled but tense. I think you might want to see this yourself, he said. The millionaire raised an eyebrow, a spark of intrigue lighting his eyes. Oh, he replied. And just like that, the laughter that had filled the room minutes ago was gone, replaced by something quieter, heavier. Anticipation. Inside the glass office, the air felt different, thicker somehow, as though the walls themselves understood that something unusual had just entered with them. The faint hum of computers and distant murmurs from the lobby seemed muted here, like the world outside had been deliberately turned down. The woman sat in the chair offered to her without hesitation, her posture relaxed but composed. She placed her purse neatly on her lap, her hands resting over it as if it were the most natural place for them to be. There was no sign of nervousness, no restless shifting or questioning glance. If anything, she appeared more at ease than anyone else in the room. The young employee stood beside the desk, still staring at the screen as if afraid it might change the moment he looked away. The manager hovered nearby, his usual confidence replaced with something more fragile, uncertainty edged with disbelief. Bring it up again, the manager said under his breath, though the quiet room carried every word. The employee nodded quickly and refreshed the account. The loading circle spun once. Twice. Then the numbers appeared again. Unchanged. The manager leaned closer, his eyes scanning line after line, verifying details he had already checked twice. Account holder name. Identification markers. Transaction history. Each piece aligned perfectly, reinforcing what seemed impossible at first glance. He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes when reality settles in whether you're ready for it or not. Ma'am, he began, turning toward her with a careful expression, how long have you had this account? She tilted her head slightly, considering the question as though measuring time in something other than years. A long time, she said. Since before this branch was even built. The manager blinked, absorbing that. I see. And, are you actively managing it? Deposits, investments, transfers. She shook her head gently. No, it manages itself. The employee glanced up, confused. The manager, however, didn't smile. He understood enough about wealth to recognize what that meant: compounding, long-term growth, silent expansion over years without interference. Withdrawals? He asked. Only when I need something, she replied. Which is not often. The simplicity of her answers only made the situation more surreal. There was no pride in her tone, no attempt to impress or explain. It was as if she were discussing something entirely ordinary. Outside the office, movement stirred. The door opened without a knock. "I hope I'm not interrupting," the millionaire said, stepping inside with the same confidence he carried everywhere else. But there was something different now, subtle, almost imperceptible. Curiosity had replaced amusement. No one objected to his presence. In fact, the manager stepped aside slightly, as though making room for him was the most natural thing to do. "Sir," the manager said, gesturing toward the monitor, "you should see this." The millionaire approached, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced ease. "Let me guess," he said lightly, "a system glitch." "No, sir." He stopped just short of the desk, his eyes flicking to the screen. For a moment, nothing happened. His expression remained neutral, almost bored. Then his gaze sharpened. He leaned in. The room seemed to shrink around that single point of focus, the glowing numbers on the monitor. He didn't react immediately. That was the first sign something was wrong. Men like him were used to instant conclusions, quick judgments. But this time, his mind paused, as though refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. He straightened slightly, then leaned in again, closer this time. "Scroll," he said quietly. The employee obeyed. Transaction history appeared, years of it. Investments, reinvestments, growth layered upon growth in a pattern so steady it felt almost deliberate. No reckless movements. No sudden spikes. Just a quiet, relentless climb. "Check the verification," he added. "It's already been confirmed, sir," the manager replied. "Check it again." The employee pulled up the verification details. Identification matched. Documentation aligned. Everything was airtight. The millionaire's jaw tightened. "Is this some kind of internal account?" he asked. "No, sir. A corporate holding." "No." He stared at the screen again, longer this time. The number didn't just surpass his expectations, it shattered them. It wasn't simply wealth. It was scale. The kind of balance that shifted perspectives, that made even the most successful individuals reconsider their place in the hierarchy they thought they understood. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he asked, "Whose account is this?" The manager didn't answer with words. He simply turned his head toward the woman. The millionaire followed the gesture. For the first time, he truly looked at her. Not her clothes. Not her shoes. Her. She met his gaze without hesitation. Calm. Steady. Unmoved. "I told you," she said softly. "I just wanted to see my balance." The words landed heavier than they should have. Something in the room shifted. The millionaire inhaled slowly, as though trying to steady himself. That balance," he began, then stopped. Even forming the sentence felt absurd. "Yes," she prompted gently. He shook his head, almost to himself. "How is that possible?" She offered a small smile, not triumphant, not secretive. Just patient. "It wasn't built quickly," she said. "My husband believed in time. And in not drawing attention." The manager listened intently now, as if every word carried weight beyond explanation. "He started it many years ago," she continued. "Investments, land, companies, things that grow when left alone. After he passed, I didn't change anything. I simply let it continue." The millionaire's eyes flicked back to the screen. All those years. All that growth. Unnoticed. Unspoken. While he had spent his life chasing expansion, making deals, appearing in headlines, this had grown quietly, almost invisibly, until it surpassed everything he had built. "I misjudged you," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. She tilted her head slightly. "You didn't know me. That didn't stop me." "No," she replied. "It usually doesn't." There was no accusation in her tone. That made it worse. The truth didn't need force. It settled on its own. The millionaire straightened, adjusting his jacket, not out of habit this time, but as if trying to reclaim something that had slipped. "Well," he said, searching for his usual confidence, "it seems you're doing very well." "I suppose I am," she answered simply. She stood then, lifting her purse with the same care she had shown when she entered. There was no rush in her movements, no lingering need to prove anything further. The manager stepped aside immediately, opening the door for her. As she walked out into the lobby, the atmosphere followed her. People who had barely noticed her before now watched in silence. Not with curiosity alone, but with something deeper, respect, perhaps even a hint of awe. The receptionist straightened instinctively. The seated clients lowered their gazes, suddenly aware of their earlier assumptions. She didn't acknowledge any of it. She simply walked toward the exit. The glass doors opened. For a moment, light spilled in around her, framing her figure against the outside world she had come from. Then she stepped through, and the doors closed behind her. Inside the office, no one spoke. The millionaire remained where he was, his eyes still fixed on the screen. The numbers hadn't changed, but something else had. For the first time in years, the measure of his success felt incomplete. He had always believed wealth was about accumulation, visibility, influence. But this was something else entirely: quiet, patient, untouchable. He exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible in the still room, and though he stood in the same place, surrounded by the same polished walls and familiar symbols of power, he felt, unmistakably, smaller.